What if the people closest to you, your friends, your family, even your colleagues, are quietly working against you? Not because you've done something wrong, not because you've hurt them, but because you've done something they never expected. You've started to grow. Most people will never tell you this. Society certainly won't. But there is a disturbing psychological truth buried deep in human behavior, a truth that Nietzsche saw over a century ago, and that most people are still completely blind to today. When you begin to rise, when you develop discipline, when you build something real, when you stop settling for less, something strange happens in the people around you. They don't celebrate you. They punish you. They become cold, critical, distant. They question your motives. They minimize your progress. They find reasons why you're wrong, why you're changing too much, why you think you're better than everyone else. And the cruelest part? Most of them don't even know they're doing it. Friedrich Nietzsche called this ressentiment, a French word for a poison that lives inside people who feel powerless. It is the quiet rage of those who cannot climb, directed at those who dare to. Carl Jung warned us that the people who react most violently to your growth are often the ones who have buried their own potential so deeply they've forgotten it was ever there. And the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, they all said the same thing in different words. The moment you begin to live by your own values, the world will resist you. This isn't philosophy for the classroom. This is a survival guide for anyone who is serious about becoming who they were always meant to be. In this video, we'll uncover 7 brutal psychological truths about why people punish you for having power, and exactly what to do about it. Pay attention. This could change everything. The moment you start improving yourself, someone will accuse you of thinking you're better than everyone else. You start waking up earlier. You start reading. You start saying no to things that waste your time. You start dressing differently, speaking differently, carrying yourself differently. And almost immediately, someone close to you says it. You've changed. They don't say it like it's a good thing. Most people believe that accusation is about them doing something wrong. They panic. They backpedal. They start shrinking themselves again to keep the peace. But here is what they don't understand. That accusation is not about you. It is about them. Nietzsche identified something he considered one of the most corrosive forces in human society: the tendency of the mediocre to frame excellence as a moral failure. In his work, Beyond Good and Evil, he described how ordinary human beings instinctively redefine weakness as virtue and strength as sin. When you grow, they don't see inspiration. They see a mirror, and they hate what they see in it. The psychology here is precise. When you change, you create what psychologists call social comparison threat. The people around you have unconsciously defined themselves in relation to you. When you were at their level, everything was comfortable. Now that you're rising, your existence alone becomes a question they don't want to answer. Why haven't I done that? Why am I still here? Why can I not do what they're doing? Those questions are too painful to sit with. So instead of answering them, they redirect the pain. They turn it into judgment. They call your discipline arrogance. They call your ambition selfishness. They call your silence pride. Think about it in real life. You've seen this. A person who loses weight and suddenly their family starts offering them food at every opportunity. A person who gets promoted and their old friends start making jokes about how corporate they've become. Someone who leaves a toxic relationship and their social circle calls them cold, distant, not who they used to be. Every single one of those reactions is the same psychological event: ressentiment, dressed in different clothes. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "The first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are, Know this for what it is. They are not criticizing your arrogance. They are mourning the version of you that made them comfortable. That version is gone. That is not your fault. The memorable truth of this section: when they call your growth arrogance, what they really mean is that your growth is inconvenient for their comfort. Have you ever noticed that the moment you start doing well, people from your past suddenly appear with receipts? You make progress, and out of nowhere, someone brings up that thing you did 3 years ago, that mistake you made, that phase you went through, that embarrassing moment everyone had forgotten. This is not coincidence. This is a psychological weapon, and it works because most people are still emotionally tied to who they used to be. When someone excavates your past, you feel the pull to defend yourself, to explain, to justify. And the moment you start defending your old self, you've stepped out of your present power. Nietzsche had a name for the people who do this. He called them the priests of guilt, figures, whether religious or social, who maintain control over others by keeping them permanently indebted to their past. The mechanism is always the same. You cannot move forward if we can keep reminding you of where you came from. Jung spoke about this through the lens of what he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we've buried, overcome, or left behind. When you grow, you naturally move away from your shadow self. But the people who are still living in theirs resent your freedom. So they drag your shadow back into the room and introduce you to it. In practical terms, this looks like this. You get a new job, and someone brings up the time you were fired. You start a business, and someone mentions every venture you've tried before that didn't work. You try to set a boundary in a relationship, and suddenly the other person lists every time you've ever failed to keep one. What they are doing, consciously or not, is anchoring you. Anchoring is a psychological technique. It ties your sense of identity to a fixed point in the past so that you cannot fully inhabit the person you are becoming now. It's one of the most effective tools of social control ever developed, and most people use it without even realizing it. The Stoic response to this is devastatingly simple. Epictetus said, "Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens." Your past is not in your power. Your present choices are. The people who live in your past are doing so because they cannot follow you into your future. The memorable truth of this section: they bring up your past not to remind you of who you were, but to stop you from becoming who you're becoming. This one is the cruelest. You take a risk. You make a leap of faith. You step into something uncertain and difficult. A new business, a new relationship, a new chapter. And right when you need support the most, the people you expected to stand beside you quietly disappear. They don't fight you. They don't argue. They just become unavailable, suddenly busy, vague, non-committal. And you find yourself alone at the exact moment you needed to feel held. Most people interpret this as betrayal and blame themselves. They think they've asked for too much, become too needy, or chosen the wrong people. But there's a deeper force at work here. Nietzsche described this dynamic in his concept of the will to power, his idea that all living things are fundamentally driven by the desire to express, expand, and overcome. When you act on your will to power, when you move boldly toward growth, it destabilizes those around you who have suppressed their own. Your leap of faith is a reproach to their stillness, not because you intended it that way, but because contrast is inevitable. A man who has chosen to stay in a dead-end job for 10 years cannot comfortably support a friend who just quit theirs to start a company, not because he's a bad person, but because doing so would require him to acknowledge something he's been avoiding, that he also had a choice, that he still does. The psychologist Leon Festinger studied what he called cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort people feel when their beliefs and actions contradict each other. Supporting your bold move creates dissonance for people who haven't made theirs. The easiest way to resolve that dissonance is to distance themselves from you. In family dynamics, this is especially painful. A first-generation college student who moves away feels their parents growing emotionally colder. A woman who becomes financially independent watches her relatives become critical rather than proud. A man who breaks a generational pattern of addiction or poverty suddenly seems too good for them. The withdrawal isn't personal, it's protective. They are protecting themselves from the mirror, but you must not wait for their support to move forward. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The support you need lives inside you. It always did." The memorable truth of this section: they don't withdraw because you've failed. They withdraw because your success would cost them something they're not ready to pay. You do the inner work. You go to therapy, or you read, or you meditate, or you simply decide one day that you will no longer react to everything that happens to you. You build emotional regulation. You become harder to provoke. You stop engaging in drama. And then someone accuses you of being cold, detached, robotic, emotionally unavailable. You used to care more. This section hits differently for people who have genuinely been through something. Because you know the truth, you didn't become cold. You became stable. And somehow, stability looks like coldness to people who are used to you being reactive. Here is why. Carl Jung observed that people unconsciously organize their relationships around predictable emotional patterns. When you were reactive, when you would argue, cry, escalate, engage in every conflict, you were filling a role. A predictable, manageable role. People knew how to navigate you. When you become emotionally regulated, that role disappears. They no longer know where to push to get a reaction. They no longer have the power to destabilize you. And that loss of influence, even unconscious influence, feels threatening. So they pathologize your peace. They call it coldness. They say you've become a different person. What they mean is, you've become a person they can no longer control. Nietzsche wrote that the most spiritual human beings feel pain differently, not more weakly, but more deeply. And yet they carry it with a nobility that confuses those who only understand loudness. Real emotional strength is quiet, and quiet strength terrifies people who only know how to respond to noise. Think of the person who always kept the group together, who mediated every argument, absorbed every mood, rescued every situation. The day they stop doing that, people don't celebrate their growth. They accuse them of abandonment. Think of the employee who used to stay late, answer emails at midnight, stress visibly about every deadline. The day they start leaving on time and protecting their energy, they're suddenly not as committed. Think of the partner who used to chase, apologize first, beg for attention. The day they develop self-worth and stop chasing, they're called distant. The Stoics had a concept for this: ataraxia, a state of tranquility, of undisturbed peace. They considered it the highest achievement of the self, not the absence of emotion, but mastery of it. Your peace is not a problem to be solved. It is the evidence that you've done the work. The memorable truth of this section: they don't miss your warmth, they miss your chaos. Because chaos was how they held power over you. You share good news, a promotion, a relationship milestone, a creative achievement, a personal breakthrough. You share it with someone you care about, a friend, a sibling, a colleague. And before you finish speaking, they have something bigger. Their news, their problem, their achievement, their struggle. The conversation shifts before it even fully began. Or worse, there is silence, a thin smile, a "that's great," with eyes that say something else entirely. This is not pettiness. This is not just rudeness. This is one of the most ancient and documented phenomena in human psychology. Social comparison theory, developed by Leon Festinger, referenced earlier, explains that human beings evaluate their own worth by comparing themselves to those around them. This is not a flaw. It is evolution. It is how tribes maintained hierarchy, cooperation, and cohesion. But in the modern world, that ancient instinct has become toxic. When you win, something inside your social group recalibrates. Without even meaning to, the people around you do a rapid calculation. Where do I stand now? What does their success mean about my failure? How do I maintain my position? Nietzsche was ruthless on this point. He wrote that the truly powerful person does not need to diminish others to feel large. But the person driven by resentment, by the poison of repressed ambition, will compulsively find ways to bring others down because it is the only way they know how to rise. This is why the most insecure people in any group are often the most competitive. Not competitive in the healthy, motivating sense. Competitive in the diminishing sense. They cannot hold space for your joy because your joy exposes the vacancy of theirs. A real-life pattern. You start a creative project, a podcast, a channel, a book, a business. You tell a friend who has always said they wanted to do something similar. And instead of enthusiasm, you get unsolicited criticism. Are you sure this is the right time? That space is really saturated. I just don't want you to get hurt. That is not concern. That is competition wrapped in the language of care. The Stoics taught something radical here. Seneca wrote, "Associate with those who are likely to make you better, not those who are simply close to you, those who make you better." Because proximity is not the same as alignment, and not everyone who calls themselves your friend is able to hold your success without flinching. The memorable truth of this section: the people who compete with your joy instead of celebrating it are showing you how little joy they carry themselves. You decide to change the relationship. You start saying no. You protect your time. You stop answering every call immediately. You stop tolerating disrespect. You communicate clearly what you will and won't accept. And almost immediately, the tests begin. They ask for exactly the thing you said you wouldn't give. They push exactly where you said the line was. They call exactly when you said you needed space. And then, when you hold the line, they accuse you of overreacting, being dramatic, being different. This is not coincidence. When you set a boundary, you change the rules of a relationship that someone else has been benefiting from. They have a vested interest in breaking that boundary, not because they want to hurt you, but because the old rules served them. Nietzsche described this through the lens of power dynamics. He believed that in any relationship, power is never equally distributed. It flows toward those who define the terms of engagement. When you were boundaryless, someone else was defining the terms. When you set a boundary, you reclaim authorship over the relationship, and people who benefited from your authorship do not release it easily. Jung spoke of what he called the persona, the social mask we wear to manage others' expectations. When you set boundaries, you are essentially removing a version of your persona that other people found useful. The version that was endlessly available, endlessly accommodating, endlessly willing to sacrifice its own needs for theirs. Losing that version of you is a loss for them. They grieve it. And grief in humans often looks like anger. In practical terms, this is the parent who guilt trips you when you stop answering the phone at midnight. The friend who accuses you of not caring anymore because you declined an invitation. The partner who calls you selfish the first time you prioritize your own well-being. These tests are not signs that you've set the wrong boundary. They are signs that your boundary was necessary. Epictetus wrote, If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. Hold the line. Without anger, without explanation, without apology. A boundary explained is a boundary negotiated, and you owe no one a negotiation over your own self-respect. The memorable truth of this section: they test your boundaries because your old self would have broken them. Prove to yourself, not to them, that your new self will not. This is the final punishment, and in many ways, it is the most important one. Some people, when they realize they cannot bring you back to who you were, when the old tactics no longer work, when the guilt trips fail, when the tests don't break you, they simply leave. And they leave loudly. They make sure you know it. They tell mutual friends. They rewrite the history of the relationship. They become the victim of your growth. And you're left wondering, what did I do wrong? You did nothing wrong. What happened is this: you outgrew the function you were serving in their life. Nietzsche was devastatingly clear about this. He wrote that the higher type of human must be prepared to be deeply misunderstood by the vast majority of people, not because the higher type is cruel or distant, but because their very existence demands something of others that others are not willing to give. Your growth demanded honesty from people who preferred comfortable lies. Your discipline demanded accountability from people who preferred excuses. Your power demanded self-reflection from people who preferred projection. They couldn't give those things. So they left. Jung wrote that individuation, the process of becoming fully yourself, is inherently a process of loss. You will lose relationships that required you to stay small. You will lose communities that needed your compliance. You will lose versions of yourself that were performing for someone else's approval. And in those losses, if you are honest with yourself, you will feel grief, real grief. Because you loved some of those people. You wanted them to stay. But here is the truth that changes everything. The people who leave when you grow were never fully there for you. They were there for the version of you that didn't threaten them. That's not love. That's comfort. And comfort and love, though they sometimes coexist, are not the same thing. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Waste no more time grieving the people who left when you became one." The memorable truth of this section: the people who leave when you rise are creating space for the ones who will meet you there. Now let us go deeper. Why do human beings behave this way? Why does growth in one person trigger punishment from another? Why is this so universal, so predictable, so devastating? The answer lives in something psychologists call status anxiety, a term popularized by the philosopher Alain de Botton. Human beings are intensely, even obsessively, concerned with their position relative to others. This is not vanity. It is ancient wiring. For most of human history, social status determined access to food, safety, mates, and survival. Low status could literally kill you. That ancient threat system still runs inside every human brain, and it doesn't distinguish between physical danger and social challenge. When your growth threatens someone's perceived status, when it suggests that they are below you, that they have failed while you have succeeded, their nervous system responds as if they are in danger. This is not metaphor. Brain imaging studies show that social exclusion and status threat activate the same neural regions as physical pain. When your growth threatens someone, they experience something neurologically similar to being hit. Now, layer on top of that what Nietzsche called the herd morality, the deeply embedded social instinct to enforce conformity. Herds survive when all members behave predictably. The member who breaks from the herd doesn't just threaten themselves, they threaten the herd's sense of order. This is why crab mentality exists across every culture in the world. The crabs in the bucket pull each other down, not out of malice, but out of instinct. The one climbing out disrupts the equilibrium for all. And then there is the layer Jung would add: the shadow. Every person has parts of themselves they've decided are unacceptable, desires they've suppressed, ambitions they've abandoned, dreams they've declared impossible. These buried parts don't disappear. They go underground. They become the shadow self. When they see you living out the ambitions they've buried, they don't just feel envy. They feel the specific agony of self-betrayal. And that agony, because it is too painful to own, gets projected onto you. Suddenly, you are arrogant. Suddenly, you've changed. Suddenly, you think you're better than everyone. What they are really saying is, you are living the life I was too afraid to live. And I cannot forgive you for it. This is not an excuse for their behavior. It is an explanation. Understanding the mechanism doesn't mean accepting the damage. It means you can stop taking it personally, and that changes everything. Now that you understand why this happens, let's talk about what to do, not how to fight back, not how to explain yourself, but how to move through this with intelligence, dignity, and power. When someone accuses you of arrogance, coldness, or changing too much, resist the urge to defend yourself. Every defense you offer is a concession that their judgment of you has authority. It doesn't. Silence is not weakness. Silence is the refusal to grant them the power of a reaction. Let your life be the argument. You do not need to explain your growth, your choices, your silence, your success, or your absence. Explanation is a form of seeking permission. You are not asking anyone's permission to become who you are meant to be. Nietzsche wrote that the person who needs to justify themselves to the crowd has already surrendered something essential. Stop surrendering. Not every person who has been in your life for a long time deserves access to your evolving self. Time spent together is not the same as genuine alignment. As you grow, you must become more selective, not more isolated, but more intentional. Surround yourself with people who are also growing, people who celebrate your wins because they have their own, people whose presence makes you sharper, not smaller. Every time someone reacts negatively to your growth, they are giving you information. They are showing you where they are, how much fear they carry, how tightly they grip the comfort of your stagnation, how invested they are in the old version of you. This data is useful. It tells you how much trust to extend, how much to share, how close to stand. This is the most important practice. The moment you begin analyzing who is against you, calculating social dynamics, managing other people's perceptions of your growth, you have taken your eyes off the thing that matters most, your mission, your work, the thing you're building. Every second you spend focused outward is a second stolen from the only direction that produces real power, inward and forward. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily. He ruled an empire while writing only to himself, not for an audience, not for validation, but to keep his attention on the only arena he could truly control: his own mind, his own choices, his own character. Return there. Return there constantly. Return there every time the noise outside gets louder than the voice inside. This has always been true of human nature. But in 2025, the stakes have never been higher. Social media has transformed social comparison from a neighborhood phenomenon into a global one. Where once you were compared to the 50 or 100 people in your immediate social world, you are now compared, or compare yourself, to millions. And the algorithms that run these platforms are specifically designed to amplify the most emotionally provocative content, which means envy, outrage, and status anxiety are not just natural emotions anymore. They are deliberately engineered. The attention economy profits from your insecurity. Every moment you spend questioning yourself, comparing yourself, doubting your growth, someone is monetizing that hesitation. And the punishments for growth have gone digital. People now receive criticism for their evolution, not just from friends and family, but from strangers. Comment sections have become arenas where the mob can perform collective resentment at scale. You post about your growth, your ambition, your achievement, and the people who cannot do the same flood in to diminish you. This is the same ancient mechanism Nietzsche described. It's just running on fiber optic cables now. Modern relationships are also increasingly fragile in the face of individual growth. The culture of oversharing, the pressure for relationships to remain permanently unchanged, the social expectation that you will bring your entire community with you or be accused of abandoning them. All of this makes the act of personal evolution more socially costly than ever. Emotional intelligence is now one of the rarest and most valuable skills a human being can possess. Not because it makes you more likable, but because it makes you unbothered. It allows you to see through the mechanisms of manipulation, envy, and projection without being destroyed by them. It allows you to grow in the middle of a world that profits from your stagnation. And the people who develop this skill, who understand why others behave the way they do, and refuse to take it as a verdict on their worth, those people are the ones who build something real, something lasting, something that the noise cannot touch. Let me leave you with this. You were not put on this earth to make the comfortable feel comfortable. You were not designed to stay small so others could feel large. You were not given ambition, curiosity, discipline, and vision so that you could bury them in deference to people who have buried their own. Nietzsche wrote, "The secret for harvesting from existence, the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment is to live dangerously, not recklessly, dangerously, to dare, to grow, to become. Even knowing, especially knowing, that it will cost you something, that some people will not follow, that some doors will close as others open." Jung spent his life studying what he called individuation, the rare and difficult process of becoming fully, authentically, completely yourself. He noted that it is the path least walked, not because it is impossible, but because it demands something most people are unwilling to give, the willingness to be alone in your becoming, not lonely. Alone. There is a difference. Loneliness is the pain of unwanted solitude. The solitude of becoming is something else entirely. It is the silence of a person who has finally stopped performing for an audience that was never worthy of the show. And the Stoics, those ancient architects of resilience, they understood that the obstacle was never outside. It was never the critics, the doubters, the envious, the ones who left. The obstacle was always internal. The obstacle was the desire for their approval. Release it. Release the need to be understood by people who are afraid to understand themselves. Release the hope that the people who benefited from your smallness will celebrate your greatness. Release the guilt of becoming someone they didn't expect. You are not responsible for their comfort. You are responsible for your growth. Marcus Aurelius, ruler of the most powerful empire in the known world, wrote these words privately, for no one but himself. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The strength was always yours. The power was always there. What changed, what is changing, is simply this. You are finally deciding to use it. And that, in the end, is the most dangerous thing you can do to a world that preferred you powerless.